Welcome to video 4, measuring lines and wall areas. So on our foundation, we're going to measure some rising walls. In the rising wall detail here, this is the external wall detail, we've got a 675 millimeter high 3-block rising blockwork wall on the inner leaf. We've got 2 blocks, which is 450 millimeters on the outer leaf, with a 3-brick 225 millimeter high plinth. I can actually click on my foundations 2 drawing, which I'd scaled at 1:20, and I can check those measurements if need be. So just to check there on the plinth at 225, and if I check those dimensions, they would be correct. So I'm just going to go back to my drawing, which has been scaled at 1:100, and I'm going to set up some new dimension groups. I'm going to set up or add a dimension group called 100 millimeter blockwork rising wall. I'm going to put it in the standard folder, but I'm going to change the subfolder to rising, and I'm going to measure it as a length. I'll get to the default display. I'm just going to leave that for the moment, and my default height I'm going to have at, it was 0.675, 675 millimeters. And I'll leave it as lime green, and I'll click insert. So there we have my rising wall down there, 100 millimeters. I'm going to add another one. This one is 100 millimeters brickwork rising wall. And keep it in the standard folder, measure as a length. Default height of my brickwork is 225 millimeters, or 0.225 of a meter, and I'll change the color royal blue. Click insert. Doesn't really matter what color you use. Maybe for the 3 walls, use 3 different colors. And my last one is 215 millimeters blockwork rising wall. Again, length measure, and default height for my 2 and 5 walls are 675. Again, give it maybe a different color, so let's say gold. So there we have 3 different dimensions: 100 millimeter blockwork, 100 millimeter brickwork, and 2 and 5 blockwork. So starting with the 100 millimeter blockwork rising wall, just click it. I'm going to measure in point mode. I always find it a little bit easier to measure in point mode when I'm measuring the lengths of lines, mainly because if I click lines and there's an overlap, I might get a double measure of a particular wall length, so it makes it a little bit easier. I'm going to start with the internal ones first, because they are 675 millimeters, and I'm going to measure along one of the edges here, just to make sure it's correct, and then maybe from the top here down. The reason I'm picking outside edges and inside edges because I don't want to double measure that corner. So essentially I'm just making sure I register the length of the wall, and then I could start here because that line will stop the wall just right here. So starting again here, and this is where the 100 millimeter wall stops as such before the 2 and 5 wall begins on the inside face. And then we've got some corner areas here. To zoom in if there's no exact point to grab, and that is essentially my internal walls, although I have a few more points here to select. So click, 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 and then moving to my final couple of corners. You can see I stopped quite a little bit short there. I'm going to drag that down. So they're essentially my 100 millimeter blockwork walls at 275 millimeters high. They really are the internal wall there. I can see it on, or the internal leaf, I can see it on the detail. That's essentially it. I didn't register these walls because they're 215 millimeters thick. If I wanted to see it in 3D, there they are essentially. So I've registered those as rising walls. So I have 48 meters and a wall area of 32 meters squared, or just over 32 meters squared. But I also want to register my outer leaf, which is for 2 blocks there, 450 millimeters high. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to double click into the dimension again, and I'm going to change my default height from 0.675 to 0.45. I'm going to select update, and would I like to apply the new dimension to all dimensions that use the default height? I don't want to do that because that'll change all my heights. I just want to select no here. So any other dimensions I measure from this point on will be at the 0.45, whereas the previous dimensions which I measured were at 0.675, and I'll keep those. So I'm going to go ahead and measure the outer leaf here. Along the inside face, just registering the length of the wall rather than actually measuring a particular side of the face. I just want to measure the length. Because I'm using point mode, I'm kind of selecting what I think the length of that wall is. So that particular wall stops there, and I can see that one beginned on the side there, so that works. What I might just do is just check those dimensions. If I don't see the height column in here, I can click the little snowflake in the top left hand corner and check the height box. Okay, so moving from dimension groups to dimensions, I want to see my full dimensions, and I can click on the different lines here to select them in the window just to see what line is what. And I can see my last number of measurements there, my 4 lines on the outside face of that outer leaf, or the outer leaf itself, is 0.45. Okay, so then my next dimension is 100 millimeter brickwork rising wall, and that's the 3 bricks on top of that 2 blocks. I've essentially already measured those dimensions. It's the outer leaf, and I measured in the previous dimension group. So I'm just going to show you a way of copying just those select dimensions into that new dimension group. So I'm going to click back on the 106 meters, which essentially is the total length of my 100 millimeter blockwork. I'm going to click dimensions, and those last 4 dimensions there, which are 450 millimeters or 0.45 in meters, I'm going to select them. So hold down Control and click the 4 dimensions. Then I'm going to right click. I'm going to say copy dimensions, and I'm going to drop it in the 100 millimeter brickwork rising wall. So a little drop down, looks like it's defaulted on that anyway, and I'm going to click OK. So I selected from my dimensions tab those 4 dimensions. They're the 4 dimensions I'm going to use. And now click back in my dimension groups, see my 4 dimensions in there. Click dimensions as 14.55, 14.55, 14.75, 14.75, and all at a height of 0.225. The height changed because if I double click in here, I had put a default height in there. So I copied them as 0.45, but the program recognizes that because I have a default height in there, it should change them. If it doesn't, you want to go back in and Control click, right click, change height, and make that change there if that change wasn't made already. So that's my 100 millimeter brickwork rising wall. What I might just do in terms of displaying that in 3D, I'm going to double click back into it again. I'm going to change the default offset to 0.45. The reason I'm doing that is essentially because these 3 bricks are already on, are built off these 2 blocks. So you'll see when I click the 3D display for that dimension and show it with the 100 millimeter block rising wall, it will show the blue dimension, which is essentially the brickwork, on the green dimension, which is the blockwork, rather than overlaying it. It won't really make a difference in terms of the quantity, but it's just kind of good for the display. So you'll see that they're both at the same height, the blockwork and then the brickwork above it. And then obviously on the other side of that leaf, the inner leaf is at the same height, 675. So my last dimension here, just clicking it, is the 2 and 5 rising walls. So just to capture those walls, I've got the external walls, which I can click, starting here. Okay, so that's registering those walls. Select, zoom in to get this inner leaf to about, I suppose, about here. And then corner to corner. My last wall is essentially from here to, it's actually up to this point. Okay, so just to see maybe all those walls together, just make sure I had the default height in there at 0.675. I have, cancel that. Show all the walls together, or all the dimension groups together, by clicking Control Hold or Control Click and View in 3D. So essentially there is my rising walls. Now they're displayed as meters. And I can just make sure that there is connections, and I've got it pretty much. If I click the 3D view, I can see that that one stops there, that one begins there. So I just want to make sure that when I hover over, or when I click those 3 dimensions together, they're pretty much measuring all the rising walls, or counting for all the rising walls on that plan, and they are in fact. They are measuring as, or displaying as meter lengths, but if I double click in and change the default display, I can't change the measurement type. I had measured them as meters, but I'm just going to change it to wall area. Update. Double click, default display, change to wall area. Okay, so 58 meters squared of 100 meter blockwork rising wall, both at a couple of different heights. The internal leaf is 675 millimeters high, and the outer leaf is 450 millimeters high. The 100 meter brick rising wall, 13 meters squared. That's just the outer leaf. Just above the 450 millimeter blockwork wall, we've got a 225 millimeter high brickwork plinth, and then we've got this corner inner leaf of the building is 215, as well as the internal block walls. I'm going to change the folder structure here on the left hand side. So my dimension groups at the moment are in a standard folder with some subfolders. What I'm going to do is set up an element 19 folder. So to do that, I'm going to start with ground floor area. I'm going to leave GFA in the standard folder. So I'm going to select or double click the ground floor area, and I'm just going to type in element 19 substructure and click update. Now that one dimension has gone into an element 19 substructure. I'm going to select, control click the next 3 items there, right click, change folder, and I'm going to drop down and select that standard, or select that substructure. Click OK. So now we have those 4 items in our substructure folder. I'm going to click maybe my first concrete item, double click the pads concrete, and in front of concrete I just need to change that to 19 substructure. So now I'll have that as the parent folder, this concrete as the subfolder, and then my first item has gone in there as a subfolder in substructure. Double click strip concrete, and it'll be available for me, substructure concrete there, click update. I'm going to do this for all my items. So now I have two folders, 19 substructure, with everything I had in standard other than the GFA relocated to substructure. I might also put this topsoil into excavation, so if I double click that and I will select 19, and that one has gone into excavation. So I've got pads, strip footings and topsoil in there, and that essentially is all my items that may be applicable in terms of dimensions to my substructure element, which I'll use in my workbook in a subsequent video tutorial. I'm just going to measure one more item. Clicking dimensions, add dimension group. I'm going to measure the CC center line of the cavity wall. Okay, I'm going to measure it as a length, and I'm going to just put it in the substructure folder. So I'll just go in as a dimension group under the parent folder. I'm not going to give it a default height. I might change the color to purple, and I'm going to click insert. So I've got this line measurement now. What I want to do is in this particular dimension, I'm going to change the point mode, and I'm going to turn off the geometry. The reason I'm going to do that is because I want to select, although I can do it if I hover or if I zoom in enough, but I don't want it to click on a point, so I'm going to turn off the geometry. Now as I'm going through my measurement, usually when I'm making line measurements, I click on the end start point and I click on the end point, and then I might, then if I was measuring the center line, come over the other side and then click on the start point and then come back and click. So in that particular dimension I would have two dimensions. I'd have my first dimension and my second dimension, which I measured. I'm just going to right click, clear all those dimensions, and I'm going to show you a way of kind of linking lines. So I'm going to start again, top left hand corner, where I think the center along that diagonal is, click. Now as I'm measuring here, I'm going to hold down Control on my keyboard. So find the kind of center again. What this does is I'm still holding Control down, it's linking my lines, and it's going to create one dimension rather than have to specifically measure 2 lines or 3 lines or 4 lines. And I'm going to come back on my first measurement, still holding Control, and then click. Now what I've got there essentially is a cavity wall length of 57.77, and if I click dimensions, I'll only have one dimension. I won't have 4 dimensions for 4 sides because I held down that Control and I clicked around. That is quite handy, for example, if I want to link a couple of different lines, say for example, holding down Control, click, 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 click. So you'll notice there, if I hover over that dimension, it's 10.67 meters, but it's got 3 sections, but it's combining it as a length. So I'm going to right click, I'm just going to delete that dimension because that's not essentially what I'm looking for. I'm looking for my center line, which is 58 meters. So I'm just going to leave it there with this tutorial. Thanks very much.